In this section, we're going to talk about absolute value inequalities. And so this basically combines your absolute value equations and your inequalities. And when you see an absolute value inequality, it is actually going to convert to a compound inequality. And the reason for this, if you look at these two examples, is you have the absolute value of this x that is larger than 3. Well, what that means is what is inside has to be more than 3 units away from x. Well, that could be any number larger than 3. That's more than 3 units away from x. But that's also any number smaller than -3. And so this greater than in an absolute value creates this or compound inequality. So you create this disjunction when you have a greater than with your absolute value. And then you have an absolute value less than 3. Well, this means all the numbers that are closer than 3 to 0. And so that's any number, of course, smaller than 3, but also any number larger than -3. So you have this in between thing or this and or conjunction that happens. So -3 and 3 become the endpoints of that, and you have your values in between that. And so these inequalities create these disjunctions here. So let's just look at this. If I were to solve and graph this, this is greater than. So I'm looking for all of the numbers that are at that +2 and further away from the 0. But that could also be the numbers at -2 and further away from 0 in this direction. So this is going to be an or problem. We could say, well, x has to be less than or equal to that -2. X has to be greater than or equal to that +2. When we look at something like this, though, it's not as clear because we now have stuff going on inside that absolute value. We do know that we want it closer than 4. So this creates an and problem. So if you'll just remember that your greater thans create your and your less thans create your and, then you're going to set up that inside piece exactly the way it was given to you, but it'll also be larger than the opposite. And then you have a pretty basic, you're going to add that 7 to all sides here. And then you're going to divide everything by 2. And so you can see that you create this and problem with that less than. And then, of course, graphing, you're going to do exactly what you've done before. You're going to open circle at 3/2, open circle at 11/2, and everything in between that. So some example problems for you to try. You can pause the video here and then check your answer when you are finished. So as you think through this particular theorem, we're going to go through this absolute value inequality. First of all, once the absolute value is by itself, um, then you have some equivalents that happen. If it's less than C, you have a conjunction. So that less than forms a conjunction, the greater than forms a disjunction. But keep in mind that is when it's by itself. So when you look at this particular example, this is not by itself yet. We do have to add that 11 over first. This is important because if there was a multiplication or division or something that would flip the sign, you're going to flip the sign before you start this process. So make sure that your absolute value is by itself first before you go through setting up your two. And then once you have that, it's going to be exactly the same that we've already done. You're going to set up those two inequalities. That greater than is going to create a disjunction. So this is going to be an or problem, and then you're just going to solve it just like you would the other problems that we've already done. So some additional problems for you to try. You can pause the video and then come back and check your work. Just want to point out a few things. For this, remember absolute value cannot be negative. So the lowest this could ever be would be equal to zero. This absolute value could never be less than zero. So that is why this is set up with just an equal. For this one, remember when you set up the opposite here, you need to do the opposite of the entire group. So you have what's inside is greater than what was given to you, what's inside is less than the opposite of what was given to you, and that is the opposite of that entire group.